Council, the GBBC. I'm really delighted to welcome you tonight to talk about a very important topic, standards, and the launch of the Global Standards Mapping Initiative, known as GSMI. I've got a great core group of partners who have worked with us for months to get this launch out the door, and we are so happy and delighted to say that we have successfully launched version 1.0 today. And this will be our first time talking to a live audience on what it is, why it's important, and what next steps are for 2021. So just to give you a quick set of figures, just high level numbers, we've got 185 jurisdictions covered, including 49 US states, 379 industry groups listed, with analysis around 30 plus technical standard setting entities. And without further ado, I'm going to now introduce our panelists. Thank you guys for joining us today. And thank you, Rich, and the WYO Hackathon team for organizing everything and allowing us to share our thoughts on the launch of GSMI. I'm going to start with Sumedha. Sumedha and the WEF team have been working tirelessly with us for many, many months now. We're finally here. Sumedha, I'd love for you to start us off by just talking about what you do at the World Economic Forum, and very specifically, why are standards important and why is GSMI important?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Sandra, and thank you, WYO Hackathon, for having us. We're really excited to be speaking here on the day of the launch, so you're getting it hot off the presses. So as Sandra mentioned, my name is Sumedha, and I work at the World Economic Forum. And at the forum, I work on a number of different projects, and I work closely with our community members and constituents to really understand what are the big gaps in policy and governance for blockchain technology. So we work in a multi-stakeholder manner with private sector, public sector, academia, and civil society to really bridge these gaps that we're seeing. And a really major one that we were getting a demand signal for was an understanding of the standards landscape. So because there's so much work going on in the technology and in the ecosystem, there's a lot of exciting work going on, but that there wasn't really a place where all of it was cataloged and analyzed as a holistic picture. So there wasn't very clear understanding of where there might be gaps, where there might be overlaps, and where there might be conflicts in some of the standard setting that was being done. And as Sandra mentioned, we took a pretty broad view on this and really got down into the nitty-gritty of not just technical standards, but also looking at regulation, industry groups, and really getting an analysis of what's out there. And at the end of the day, from our view, this is really about making technology that works for end users, right? So to understand how we're thinking about user protection, how we're thinking about usability, all of technical standards and regulations are very important to all of those things. So we thought this was a very important first step, and we'll be continuing to build on this and build from it. And so we think it's a very important foundational piece of work.
You said a lot of great things there, but I do want to highlight that, as you've mentioned, this is a first step. And with that, Justin, will you please introduce yourself and your role at Accenture and why this is important to a firm like Accenture and to yourself, who is a critical member of this community?
Yes, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And it is fantastic to be here with such an esteemed group of panelists as well, and partners that have been working on this initiative with us over the past 6 months or so. And so my name is Justin Herzig. I lead the blockchain research practice from a research organization within the blockchain and multi-party systems team at Accenture. My goal and our team is really to take a data-centric approach, a survey-focused primary research approach to solving some of the challenging issues in the blockchain ecosystem. And that's why it's a perfect fit for this type of work. You know, at Accenture, we're really proud to support such a truly foundational effort as this initiative, as already alluded to twice, really takes those first vital steps to improve the development and our collective understanding of the standards in this ecosystem. So this topic is extremely pertinent to us at Accenture as we built our business around the critical needs, the requirements of our clients. And this topic of standards between organizations, between technologies, between states, countries, 49 states we even looked at, as Sandra mentioned. It's a top of mind concern to our clients, and that if not addressed, it's a detractor and a preventer from further investment in this and similar types of technologies. So we really look forward to continuing to partner, as this important effort really moves beyond that first phase, with a goal to really ensure that standards are deployed in a way that really builds a better understanding of the technology's value across the ecosystem. And that value component is always so pertinent to us, that we're leading with a value standpoint with clients and helping them understand, with such a new and emerging technology, how do we push this forward? And our partnership obviously directly ties to the active members of this, but beyond that, this is really the larger ecosystem that we hope to put a call out there for, a call to action for others to join us and share their voices as we really progress forward beyond just this first phase.
Absolutely. And Justin, we're going to come back to that point about having others involved. That we've just started it. And frankly, there's much more work to be done, which we'll be discussing. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Ben, who's representing 6 Digital Exchange out of Switzerland, very critical market infrastructure. Ben, please tell us what you do at SDX and why standards are important, why GSMI in particular is important to SDX.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sandra. And it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you to the WIO Hackathon and the GBBC to allow us to participate here. My name is Ben Nadareski. I oversee the corporate development function and strategic investments for 6 Digital Exchange. For those not aware of what 6 Digital Exchange is, we are a wholly owned subsidiary of 6 Group, which owns the Swiss National Stock Exchange Group. We are aiming towards being the first regulated institutional digital asset exchange and CSD venue that focuses on true institutional digital assets outside of the cryptocurrency markets. And with that, there's a lot of product development, a lot of work with financial institutions, and a lot of work with global entities. And with all of those come standards, and that has been a key issue for years now that we've been working on for the last 5-6 years to establish standards and common practices so that all of these siloed efforts that are going on in the digital asset space, whether it be in Switzerland, across the EU, Asia, Americas, are held to the same set of functionalities and standards and characteristics that allow the seamless global transfer of assets, seamless transactions, and an ease of onboarding for new participants to actually develop and build their digital asset businesses. And with the first step with any problem, it's lay it all out on the table and let's see where we're at. And the GSMI effort has done a great job so far of bringing all of the regulatory and standard issues on the table. And in this first phase, we're very excited to be leading the effort in mapping out each of these global standards in the digital asset space.
Thank you so much for that, Ben. And as goes without saying, we appreciate the support of institutions like SDX really leading the way to make sure that these kind of projects happen. And without further ado, we've got Brian Bellandor. He really doesn't need any introduction, but he has a special role that he's played in this particular initiative. So I'd love Brian to introduce himself, obviously Hyperledger, and why GSMI is important, but also to give us a little bit of insight into, what his role really was in all of this. Thanks, Brian. Go ahead.
Thanks, Sandra, and I apologize if there's noise in the background. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. So I'm Executive Director of Hyperledger, an initiative hosted at the Linux Foundation. In fact, have so many of our organization's friends here on the call. 6 just joined recently. Thank you very much, Ben. Justin, you and Accenture have been a part of Hyperledger since our very beginning, and even Sandra. I first got to meet you in the context of CME, who joined as an early Hyperledger project. And of course, I've gotten to know the WEF because I was Chief Technology Officer for the World Economic Forum for a few years in an earlier life cycle. So we have been very interested in standards, even though what we focus on is writing software and fostering the development of open source software, getting it out there, because there's long been a very not just harmonious, but kind of symbiotic, that was the word I was looking for, relationship between infrastructure style open source projects and digital standards out there. I'm thinking back even 25 years ago to the beginning of the Apache web server project, where having the HTTP standard being developed by the IETF was really important for the Apache web server project, and the fact that there were people on both of those processes only helped make those two things work even more effectively together. But it was always very helpful to say, well, we're just implementing this open reference standard and living within that as a way to help move the entirety of an industry towards common technologies and open technologies, really. In the blockchain space, we've had a lot of standards efforts and even standards efforts to put standards together. In fact, I will take a little bit of credit for pulling Sandra and Sumedha together when having participated on the World Economic Forum's Blockchain Council for a while and hearing about and working with Ocean, who couldn't be here today, and others on kind of the beginnings of something like this, then talking with Sandra and hearing about a similar effort there, going, you two should talk, and then seeing this come together. So been very happy to participate in that, happy to see this all come together. And I think there's been some really interesting insights that have come out of this work. So I'll end there and leave the bulk of my observations for the conversation.
Sure. And Brian, you can take full credit for being the bridge, because frankly, I hate to hear of redundant efforts in this industry. And frankly, you saved us a great deal of time and energy by the collaboration and the connection. So.
And that's what standards efforts should be all about, right? Is helping us all kind of just work together on the bits that are common so that we can all then spend more of our time and effort on the bits that are differentiated further up the stack.
So here's the thing, guys. When someone first came up to me, and this has been brewing for quite a few years now, of the lack of common standards, the lack of common taxonomy, the lack of just common X, whatever you want to say in this industry, because everyone's building in their silos. I always thought, there's someone already kind of knitting this all together. So there's no reason for the GBC or any other organization to really be doing this, because it's already happening. What I've discovered by the feedback from a lot of our members and supporters and friends is that actually it was a need that wasn't being met. And so frankly, that's why we got involved from a GSMI standpoint. And I think listening to the community sometimes, it's very important that we kind of take our heads out of our, respective lanes and see what's around, because I think it's very easy to kind of stay in your lane and not see that there's actually things that we need to knit together. So I'm glad that we've done the first step, which is version 1.0. So let's talk about some of the findings. I think this is the meat of the conversation now. Sumedha, do you want to kick us off with the technical side, and then we're going to move on to legal, regulatory, and industry consortia after that. But can you just kick off some of the highlights that you discovered after evaluating with your partners the 30 plus industry, the standard setting bodies?
Yeah, absolutely. And to echo what you were saying, Sandra, I think as we kicked off this research, we were kind of expecting a database somewhere that we could pull from and analyze, and it ended up being a lot of manual looking through the initiatives that were going on. So I think it really is something that we weren't able to find anywhere else. And because we were able to get this kind of big picture view on what was going on, we had a number of key findings, which one of them, which I alluded to, is that there are a number of gaps and overlaps in the space. So there are some areas where there's a high volume of activity and a lot of excitement. So we saw a lot of activity around digital identity, around IoT, around taxonomies, for example, but other areas where we might want some activity and we're not really seeing much there. So for example, we actually haven't seen much in the ways of when to actually use blockchain and how to evaluate it. That's been standardized. So I think that was a really key takeaway for us. And also just how, when there are overlaps, there can be conflicts that arise. So if we're thinking about standards and we're hoping that they're a shared set of definitions, for example, or a shared set of ways of operating. When there are even the slightest of differences, and we're building one on top of the other, those differences can really have ripple effects down the line in how they're implemented, how they end up affecting the technology. So we found a few of those conflicting definitions or differences that we think down the line, as we keep building upon these differences, they could have pretty significant implications. Another thing that we thought was very interesting is just evaluating the composition of these standard setting groups. So obviously they're being done in different ways, and they have different amounts of representation. But what we see is that sometimes there isn't this geographic representation, for example, or representation of different groups of expertise, or even the end users in the process. And obviously that's going to significantly shape the outcomes of the standard setting effort. So we can see that they may be shaped in the image, let's say, of incumbents, or the people that are willing to throw the most weight behind standard setting efforts, or hegemonic powers who are able to be involved in these efforts. And I think that is a bit antithetical to the way that we're thinking about blockchain technology, and undermines some of the promise of the technology. So I think just being really deliberate about that is very important. And then finally, I think just evaluating the model of standard setting as a whole from the technical side, right? So I think the governance of blockchain technology is in some ways different than we've seen in the past. Obviously, as Brian mentioned, we've seen distributed systems like the internet find common ground and have standardization. But I think there are some models, and I won't call them out, but there are some models that may have, walls around their standards and walls around their implementation, which again, may be antithetical to the way that we're thinking about blockchain technology, and to creating this common language and foundation for people within the ecosystem. And so that's the main standards. And I think Brian probably has a lot more to add on the technical side as well. So I'll save some for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to go to you, Brian. I think what's been laid out are the 34 or 30 plus technical standard body entities that now this has been aggregated. What, Brian, do you think is most critical now that we've identified some of the gaps where there's just a lot of work being done, places where there's not a lot being done? What do you think we really need to do with this? First, digest it, obviously have a conversation around the debate around some of these things that Sumedha mentioned, but what other thoughts do you have, especially as a group that builds these blockchains? What would you like to see?
Well, there's a famous XKCD comic, number 927, if anyone wants to reference it, which starts out, oh my gosh, there's 14 different standards for doing this thing. I'm going to write a new standard that covers all the different use cases. Result, there are now 15 competing standards for doing a thing. Right. There's a certain, conceit that all developers have that they've kind of got the right one true way to build this code. And the good news is it's really easy to engage in open source software development, to put up, a GitHub repo, launch a Google Docs page and say, I've got, something here, or launch a wiki, something there. What's much harder to do is to figure out how to use somebody else's standard and even harder to figure out how to contribute to that, how to add to it. And that's a skill that I think, we haven't really, haven't really developed well in the technology community. So one thing that I hope comes out of this, I certainly hope lots of people read it and people in the technology industry read it and ask themselves, do they really have a differentiated, highly unique take on how the world should work? If so, build your own stuff, write your own standard. But frankly, other people have probably thought about some of these same challenges as you and made some progress on it, and think about adding to theirs rather than reinventing from scratch. The second is, not to dismiss the urgency of this issue, but we can kind of relax about this. 25 years ago, when most IT products that you bought and most standards were oriented around hardware, it was a lot more expensive to upgrade things, to replace software running in that hardware. It was often embedded, often these were devices that weren't connected. Today, we're all talking about software systems, and all these software systems are being frequently updated. I mean, even on the blockchain for enterprise side inside Hyperledger, we're seeing new releases quarterly of things like Fabric and Hyperledger Bezu and other platforms. So these things can evolve pretty quickly over time. I don't think we have to worry too much about things being truly locked in. In fact, what we're seeing are a lot of the technology teams incorporating kind of standards development in the course of writing the code and letting the code serve as the specification rather than these as two separate processes. You see that in Bitcoin with the BIPs and EIPs and Ethereum and those sorts of things. I think the most critical places to try to converge on some common standards are around identity. So digital identity, I think there's been a lot of progress made in actually non-blockchain standards, things called DID and verifiable credentials that give us kind of a real substrate for weaving together different identity systems. And so as long as you see a blockchain identity network that uses those primitives, you're already halfway to interoperability between these different protocols. And I think the second one is that occurs to me after kind of reading this and some other conversations is one of the places we've kind of forgotten about in terms of talking about interoperability and standardization is at the end user level. Users being whether consumers holding wallets or enterprises that don't have big IT teams, the more convergence and standardization we can have around the wallet space and the end user space to do the equivalent for that Mozilla frankly did for the web browser space, right? Is I think an essential part to advancing all of our interests.
We're going to tie some of these comments to the legal and regulation side. I'm going to turn over to Ben and Justin to give insights. They were the co-chairs of the Legal, Regulation, and Industry Consortia side of the fence. And Ben, could we start you off with just some of the one or two highlights that struck you the most that you'd like to share with the audience? Obviously, we want everyone to read the reports, but we're going to give you some teasers here.
Absolutely. So right off the bat, I think that when it comes to the legal and regulatory space specifically, the true value of blockchain is still being unearthed. I mean, everybody in this industry, everybody in the call, everybody here over the last 5-6 years, we're still driving towards really unlocking what blockchain can do for our industries. And one of the key things that are still blocking that is that when all of these projects are being developed in silos and they're developed under their own standards, their own technical standards in different jurisdictions, we're essentially creating a very similar system that exists today, which is a huge red flag for everybody in the industry. And why? Because we're going to create a system in silos that's going to still replicate hundreds of processes in order to validate basic transactions, this and that, whatever it might be. Having these type of standards mappings is going to be so crucial because one of the key findings from the paper is there is a lot of overlap that already exists. In each of the different jurisdictions, you look at Bermuda compared to Switzerland's landscape of how they handle digital tokens versus digital assets versus crypto assets, how they handle it in Japan. There's a huge amount of overlap. I mean, if you drew this all in a Venn diagram specifically, you'd see this. And this is something that the report highlights. If we can take those overlapping pieces and standardize them, you can start to unlock some of those deeper value propositions that we've been pitching for blockchain for years now. What I see is what you see, seamless transfer among assets on multiple counterparties. Let's remove the jurisdictional and regulatory block without removing the regulations. And that's one of the key things I think standards can unlock with this piece as well.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about some of the very fundamental basic things we were actually not arguing, but having discussion about, because it's amazing to me that we're still having issues around taxonomy, but that's a stream of work that I think it's going to go into 2021. It's just
exactly. And to Brian's point earlier as well, right? We don't want to be that 15th organization redefining what crypto asset and digital asset is. At the end of the day, it's going to be dependent on each jurisdiction. Each country is going to have their set of definitions. And the biggest piece will be, how do we translate it? If I do a transaction from Switzerland to Bermuda, And I'm able to map how they define a token versus how we define a token, how they define a securitized asset versus how we define a securitized asset, all on blockchain. It's going to really unlock the true global value proposition behind the whole technology that we've been pitching and we've been working towards, and that all of us as innovators on the blockchain and DLT side have seen for years now. So it's a very exciting effort. If this in this phase one, we can map it, start drawing the Venn diagrams of where the overlap is. Step two is to really drill down and say, now for a transaction and specific examples, let's start to map these together, and that way it can become actionable for each of the counterparties.
Right, absolutely. Justin, would love to get your thoughts on what struck you. You obviously also worked on the industry consortia side. I will tell you, I was blown away by the sheer number of industry consortia that are supposedly working in the blockchain space. Tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, it's really shocking. And I mean, when I think about this, so taking even a step higher, the GSMI really centers on two crucial questions. One, what does that current landscape look like, for these three areas that we referenced? And second is, what parts of standardization and regulation can we address today in a sustainable, informed, and effective way? And it actually reminds me of some work that we did with Sumedha at the WEF 2 years ago, and we ran a massive international survey. And one of the things we found is that of blockchain professionals, people who are actually doing this for their day job, 45% of them didn't invest in the technology because they were unsure how to start. And when you dive a bit deeper into that, you start realizing that a lot of it is also, through our conversation, concerns over what I'm building today. Is it going to even be relevant in 3 to 5 years? Is it going to connect to what other people are doing? And then we start looking and we see, well, there's nearly 400 consortia out there. And when we take a look at this, I'm in a training session earlier today, actually, and our teams are practicing their pitches. They're, as an education session. And we're like, okay, what we want to do is take a look at these consortia and actually learn from them. And so they're looking at a healthcare opportunity. And I think they found around 20 or 25 different healthcare consortia that were US or international based. And how much, so much of you talk about this overlap, and you just get overwhelmed with it. And I think this effort allows you to say, okay, let's take it a step up. Let's take it and take a holistic idea of what's actually going on there, what is most pertinent, what's most relevant. And what this research has really taught us when you dive in is, while there's been significant regulation around standardization, around an area such as digital assets, there's still very little about the actual technology. You have some around use cases, and that makes sense because groups are coming together and they're solo track focused on, let's create standards for this opportunity that we're really coming together for. But around that broader technology, it's still a bit limited. And with the challenges for the uses of the technology constantly emerging, constantly evolving, but the need for regulatory, regulation and regulatory environment and clarity there remains constant, not really dynamic. And so these are the things that really, within Accenture, we're already having these conversations with clients. It's the things they're asking us. And that's why we've already started internally training around understanding and doing that mapping, that landscape of what's out there. And even that was just a first step in the direction when you bring it all together with all the work that's being done with this GSMI.
Great. Thank you for that. And not to be too remiss, but if the audience has any questions, please do put them in the comment box and we will get to the questions as we progress. I want to tie together the technical report with the legal and regulation in particular report, because this technology, it's not about regulating the technology itself, but it is about the fact that it touches upon so many regulated areas that regulation is critical. And this is a technology like, the internet does not respect borders. And therefore, if we are truly going to unlock the potential, as Ben said, what are some of the key things that the technical side and the legal and regulation side really need to sort of focus on? If I could get some of your thoughts around that, because I don't think this is a technology where you can just say technical standards in one box and then legal and regulation in a different box and they shall not meet. I don't think it works that way. We'll start with Ben. Sounds like you want to say something.
Yeah, I can hop in quickly here. There's two aspects I'll take this in. The first, from a technical perspective, look, there's been a few blockchain solutions that have really emerged as the primary players. We've seen it as Hyperledger, we've seen it as Ethereum, we've seen it as Corda, as the prominent players that people will use on day one solutions, we'll call them, in the blockchain industry. In those day one solutions, there should be some sort of standards. We've had things in the past like ISO standards for traditional financial assets. We have ISIN identifiers on things like corporate bonds and whatnot. You have these specific pieces that are necessary if you're going to launch, for example, a digital bond. Well, that's one of the key use cases we look at Six Digital Exchange. And it's going to be one of the key use cases we launch with next year. And if we can't just launch this in a silo, and we can't just launch it on, we're building on Corda at the moment, but we need to be able to have that be interoperable with all different ledgers. We need it to be interoperable with different jurisdictions and regulatory environments, or else all we're doing is creating a bond that's going to have 3 or 4 buyers in a very local space. So how can we actually change that? And how do we relate the technical and legal sides to this? You look at the specific standards and characteristics of what a tokenized securitized bond would look like and contract, and then you start to map the technical features that would be acceptable to each of the different jurisdictions. Now, you're not going to be able to have one set of total standards across the board for this. However, you will be able to have at least certain identifiers that will be able to recognize, okay, well, we need the Corda contract or the Ethereum or Hyperledger contract in this form plus XYZ for our jurisdictional add-ons, whatever that might be. And that can be a starting basis for allowing these type of assets to actually grow into market naturally and organically like other traditional financial assets do.
Ben gave us a great example of digital bond issuance, but really anything related to issuance in the capital markets, I think, are going to be challenged in the very same way that Ben's just mentioned. So any thoughts on how we help, obviously this is the financial services use case, but there are others. How do we make sure that these identifiers, these common sort of markers, how do we make that happen? Brian, do you have any thoughts? Sumedha, Justin?
There's a form of regulatory processes which involve basically maintaining a large directory and thinking about, what is a stock symbol, right? Stock ticker symbol. Sorry about that. Which business entity does that correlate to, right? That's actually not a solved problem out there. There are ways to use blockchain technology to build these kinds of systems that avoid kind of having to park all of the trust and the maintenance of that into one institution, whereas there's plenty of those kinds of institutions now. I think one of the other places where government and regulatory kind of processes interface with the underlying plumbing and technical standards are in those domains where government is a participant in these blockchain networks. I'm thinking of things like the Drug Supply Safety and Security Act, DSCSA Certification and Safety Act, which is coming into effect in the United States over the next few years. In fact, it could play a big role in helping ensure that the distribution of vaccines for COVID-19 is done accurately and fairly and avoids fraud in that supply chain. The government authorities will run a node on blockchain networks that are used to publish product traceability information, even though it'll be predominantly a private sector driven platform. The needs of government are there to make sure that they can run a node, right? So part of it is, well, what are the kinds of technologies acceptable by government? It might bring up certain things that are, if it involves a speculative financial instrument, that might be an issue for them, right? But it also means they need an operational capacity in this. They need to understand how do they staff up? How do they outsource it? How do they manage that? And how does it become the system of record? Government cares hugely about the sanctity of records, especially in places like the White House. I worked in the White House for a year, the first year of the Obama administration, and the amount of extra legwork you had to do to conform with the Presidential Records Act, even when doing things like standing up a blog that could take comments from the public, it'll blow your mind, right? So what does it mean to treat these ledgers as not only as corporate records, as a single source of truth, but as government records as well, from a longevity, from a National Archives point of view. And that's where these two big issues really do come together.
Right. Well, I'll be frank with you guys. I think you've hit upon one area of future work, which I'm just going to mention because it's been brought up several times now, which is unique identifiers. So the beauty of fixed trading for those in the markets that trade it all, fixed trading has specific codes for instruments, and there's a view that there should be ones for token, unique identifiers for tokens, digital assets, but also for any digitized financial instrument as well. And that if there was this directory that's commonly accepted and then utilized, that could be a very powerful thing. So that could be a stream of work that we work on in 2021, just to flag that. Go ahead.
If looking on the fixed side, I just want to jump in and say that this is, I think, where we have a very unique opportunity with the digital asset space. Even in equities or fixed income, whatever traditional financial market space you look at, there are several sets of standards that still exist and you still have to corroborate, and it's still a nightmare. What we want to avoid at all costs is creating 6 or 7 different systems that have to be looked at and have to be corroborated, or else, again, we're creating a very similar system that exists today and backtracking the value proposition of blockchain. I mean, it has to be flexible. It has to be understandable by all parties, and it's going to start with the technical piece, so that things like the fixed standards, we can avoid having fix plus XYZ standards that you now have to corroborate, because even in traditional financial markets, it's quite a nightmare, as every trading will tell you, to make sure you go through. And then there's middle office and back office discrepancies left and right that we're seeing. I mean, it's something that we can actually make a change when we look at standards for, which is extremely exciting to make a revolutionary change in the industry.
Well, I think we need to take a mental note. Ben's brought up another thing. We should probably look at what exists today in the form of common language or directories and make sure that we build better and not the same. Sumedha, Justin, any thoughts that you want to add to, or we can move on, but between the technical and the legal and regulation relationship?
Yeah, from our side, I think, education remains key. I think from the technical standpoint, there's just so much progress that's happening so quickly. And, in my job, we're interfacing with the governments and public sector and policymakers all of the time. And the lag is very real in terms of the knowledge and understanding. I think we have to be patient, and we have to make sure that those two sides are talking and they're talking well, right? So it's not always someone's job to keep up with the work that's going on in the technical standards space, to keep up with the advancements that are happening. As Brian said, software is getting updated constantly, and especially through improvement proposals. It's a much more flexible model than some of these policymaking entities are used to. So I think it's really important to keep that dialogue alive and to keep the education first mentality, to keep that connection. And I think part of that is what we discussed earlier. I think the taxonomy is going to be really, really key, and getting clear on definitions. And I think obviously there's a proliferation of philosophies that remain in the space. And I think that's reflected in the technical standards, but I think that ultimately does us a disservice when it comes to how they're translated into regulation. Because there's I think I obviously policymaking is a risk-aware process, but sometimes that goes to the point of regulating for extremes, and regulating in the confines of what we already have. So retrofitting what we have to new systems. So I think getting very clear is to the benefit of every philosophy within blockchain technology, because that way we're not, regulating or policymaking for extreme scenarios or things that policymakers aren't understanding.
Yeah, and I'll echo that, especially the education understanding is key, and it's education among everyone. This is regulators, this is our clients, this is our partners, this is from a technology side. This is a technology that is really about coming together in multi-parties. Even within our own practice, we've kind of changed our branding from blockchain to multi-party systems, because it's no longer just about one technology, but it's about how do we bring these organizations together to solve challenges that they're all experiencing. And so when we think of that education being at the forefront of it, that's key to breaking down silos, which then is another thing that we know is important. And so if we can use these type of opportunities, not only just the GSMI, but the conversations that downstream we have, all of us here, not only the 5 of us, but the people listening, end up being our supporters, our voices out there who are actually enunciating and making it clear how important it is for us to come together, because this isn't just a technology like AI where I can deploy it within my own company and I'm going to reap the benefits. The value comes from the ecosystem, from that true ecosystem effect. So let's find a way to all partner to go towards that common goal. And that's where I think education, it starts with, it drives it, and continue forward.
And one thing I'll just add that Justin's comments inspired is that the relationship is.
I think what we should do probably for our last bit of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the relationship is both ways, right? So when regulations do come out, it's really important that industry is able to collaborate and react in a way that is useful. So one example that we profiled is the messaging standard that came out of FATF's travel rule, right? So that was an industry-led initiative to be able to respond to guidance, but that wouldn't have been possible without cross-entity collaboration. So I think it has to go both ways as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more of this multi-stakeholder, cross-collaboration, global collaboration. I think we were going to see a rise of that. I do want to talk a bit about some of the feedback we've already gotten in the first day. We have made this completely open and free. And that's a choice we as a group made. Can we talk a little about why we think, in the spirit of the blockchain ecosystem, why that was important for us to release this to the wild, to the world, as a resource? Because I have gotten positive feedback from places like, and academic institutions as well as governments, from Cyprus, Ivory Coast, Brazil, the UK, I mean, in the US, all over. It's been really interesting. People are so grateful, and they are already playing around with the map. They're going to read the report. Why do you think it was important for us to really keep this open access and information free for all?
I'll quickly just mention that, I mean, look, it's the spirit of blockchain. This whole industry started with the open source push in the truest form possible. I mean, this is, as we've seen with all new technologies, whether it's from the private sector or public sector, it begins. Its true growth period is seen when you open this up to the general public and you're actually able to see it grow in the wild.
That's right.
And to Justin N's, it's the network effect that actually benefits this piece of technology. So it would be amazing if down the road, the GSMI effort has turned into a single source of truth for everybody that's developing digital assets. And they say, oh, I need to understand standards. That's what's going on in the countries that I want to do business in. They click on a link. They're immediately pointed to what standards have been done, the updates, the resources that they need to reference that point directly. There is such a blockage, even from our internal organization. We can obviously develop them very well within the Swiss regulatory framework with FINMA licenses and everything in between. But as soon as we cross that international barrier, that's where things start to get hazy. So if we had a source of truth personally from an organization driving leading institutional digital asset efforts to point to, it's going to fast forward the process of adoption and time to market for a lot of digital asset products.
Yep.
Awesome.
And I mean, when I think about this, I really think about the common goals here being around the 3 C's, and the openness, this making it free to everyone is really pivotal. And so the 3 C's are: 1, collaboration, providing a forum between industry players, developers, regulators to have these conversations. The 2nd is cultivation.
Yep.
And this is around education. Educate at all levels, encourage adoption through that open education, and a push for educated regulation. And then the 3rd is creation. And this is the creation of valuable tools, best practices in the ecosystem. As Ben said, maybe we can create that standard so we have that single source of understanding for everyone to really come together. And I think all 3 of those, that openness that we create, allowing this, putting it out there for the public to actually not just digest, but join in on going forward, it's a great first step in that beginning first phase, as we talked about.
And as the open source poster child here, I feel obligated to weigh in on this. But
Absolutely.
and I have to And all of us here have to pay rent, but 3 of the 5 of us here represent organizations that are consortia that create essentially, I know WEF might challenge this a bit, but digital public goods, right? And in this sense, again, the spirit of collaboration, the spirit of actually building upon each other's work rather than inadvertently competing, is very much in line, again, with where the internet came from, where much more by open organizations like the IETF, frankly, than by organizations that required licensing in order to get access to standards. That's a controversial position in the standards world. There are some people who run standards bodies who charge you for access to standards, and that's just not worked in internet technologies. I'm much more inspired by things like my friend Carl Malamud, who runs publicresource.org, where he gets in legal trouble for publishing on the open internet the regulations and national bodies of law that people are supposed to live with. And he does this as a public service, right? It would be unfathomable to me to think that the regulations we have to live within or the laws that apply to that we have citizens have to follow wouldn't be accessible and open, that you'd have to pay money to access those. So thank you, Sandra, and thank you to the WEF for working together to make this truly a digital public resource.
Thank you, Brian. Sumedha?
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I'd say is that, it's not useful, and we'd be doing the same things that we are cataloging here by restricting access if people aren't able to use this and aren't able to see the full picture, right? So if only some people are able to see the full picture, we run into the 15th standard problem again. So I think this is the mapping initiative in its most useful form, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And we absolutely adhere to the open and free access and, frankly, collaboration building upon what we've started. All we've done is take a start, a first step forward. We need so much more. And that means we need a lot more brains, a lot more talent to come in to help us fill some of these gaps. And so let's talk about next steps, guys. We haven't fully formed out. We just launched this version. We obviously will get feedback and hopefully mold and adapt to whatever the feedback is that we need to do for version 2.0. But let's talk about what 2021 could look like in terms of an ideal GSMI scenario. So number one, how do people get involved? And I think we have a short answer to that, which is there's a link, which WEF, thank you very much for creating. You just click on the button and you literally can join and make comments however you want to get involved, or if you have feedback on both landing pages. So we'll show that at the end. And also, if there are organizations that would like to partner, how would you guys like to see some of this roll out? And how would an organization really truly partner with us? So I'm happy to take any one of the 4 here to opine on that, because we're pretty open, right?
Absolutely. I'd love to start in saying that it's twofold for an organization that could get involved. First and foremost, jump on the opportunity to look at the resources that we've published so far to date and focus on 2 major things. Number one, where does your company sit as far as a jurisdictional effort goes? Do you feel as if the GSMI effort and what the research has released out into the public is representing, first and foremost, the regulatory efforts of the country and regulatory environment which you sit in? But then second, does it represent some of the key use cases that you focus on? So from our perspective, we're focused on capital market products. So we're going to view this in a very capital markets focused way, but that'll help drive very use cases on the technical and legal side. We're bringing our expertise to the table as Six Digital Exchange to help drive those efforts. And if that's done by hundreds of industry players across hundreds of countries, this effort will become the vision in which we've set this out to be, which will be that first resource to actually map, as its name suggests, all of the standards in the digital asset industry.
Yes.
So really take an actionable effort and say, and does it answer the 2 things that we're driving in the digital asset industry?
Thanks, Ben.
Can I make a pretty nerdy suggestion?
Yeah.
So, in the software in the software world, we are used to using Git and GitHub and version control tools to manage change to a data set or to a body of work, to a body of IP. And often that can be constructed in ways that they can drive the generation of things like mapping tools and that sort of thing. So what about having the data set behind, at the very least, the technical standards work, but potentially even the national scale work, stored in on a GitHub repo? And the interesting thing here would be that then proposed changes to that, updates to different elements, additions to the data set, or as all these things evolve, especially on the technology side, get proposed as as pull requests, essentially. And then the control over that change is still, you can decide how that's shared between WEF, GBBC, and others in the community, but at least it's an open door to having a really efficient process for updating all of that information. It sounds a little nerdy, but I've seen non-programmer communities using this as a change management tool. And the great thing is then you get this beautiful history of where all the different changes came from when they were introduced and who made them. And that I think is really key. Kind of like
now, is there a technology that can track this all?
You could use a blockchain for it, but I'm also a big fan of the simplest tool for the job, and standing something up on GitHub, as centralized as it is, and we can solve that problem separately. It's at least the way to get started here.
I love it.
And I think it's a fantastic suggestion. Yeah. It really gets to that crowdsourcing, and I will echo, and as Sandra mentioned, on the website, the ability just to get involved. Just think about what do you want to contribute? Mm-hmm. What inspires you here? What interests you here? Even if you don't think that, there's not a great role you're going to play, I question that. Just get involved, contact us, and I'm sure through an early conversation, we'll figure out what role you can play and what value you can provide, because there's so much still to do in this space, and there's so much that we can learn from all of you. So please just take that first step and contact us, even if it's just any of us on Twitter, through the message, whatever it is. We'd love to just start that conversation.
Amazing. Sumedha?
Yeah, I agree. And I think I would say just use the tools as they are too. So we hope that you're able to access it, use it in your business operations and your interactions with policymakers. I think, a large reason to do this is so not only are you contributing directly to the GSMI, but are you finding places that you can collaborate that you weren't collaborating before? Are you finding areas or ideas for regulation that you can be inspired by? So I think that's another great way to just, at the very minimum, get involved with GSMI.
Absolutely. And as a side benefit, I will say to you guys, there's also great trivia questions that could come out of looking at our reports and the interactive map. My first trivia question, for example, is we list 49 US states which have proposed either bills or some sort of guidance. What is the one state that has done nothing in crypto and blockchain? You'll have to go figure that out. We have literally a few minutes left, so I'm going to round it off by asking each of you, we've all been sitting in our respective spots around the world. It's been very different lifestyle than probably the year before, where most of us were, let's face it, probably the worst carbon footprint offenders. Our worlds have changed. We've managed to publish this and launch this in the middle of a pandemic. What does that say to you about the community, the global community, and our desire and our passion to get stuff done? I mean, it says a lot to me, and I'm very proud of this entire group and all of our collaborators. Just share with us if you have a story, or if you what your thoughts are around how we're going to get through this. We're probably in for another long haul into 2021. How can we make sure that we stay connected, not just the Zoom thing, but how do we make sure that we keep going? Because I think it's very easy to give up, but this community I know does not give up easily. So share with us any of your personal thoughts or thinking around, how do we make this bigger and better? Obviously, people need to get involved, but appreciate your personal thoughts on this as well.
I'll toss in. Before the pandemic, I was probably traveling 60% of the time, maybe 2/3 of the time, and have actually deeply appreciated not having to travel at this point in time. I've got a 5-year-old daughter, and I just like being able to not be away that much. And I do think a lot of the times, especially in the blockchain community, our face-to-face meetings were largely performative. They were largely for things that we could have accomplished remotely, but we showed up because everyone else was showing up. You didn't want to not appear to be a team player. So I'm looking forward to having the first excuse I can to getting back to London and Amsterdam and Beijing and Singapore and all these fabulous places. But I think we've demonstrated you can be at our level and in the industry we're in pretty effective collaborating from our different positions. Don't get me wrong, I'm looking forward to coming back to Davos when I can and many of those other places. But it shows not just our determination, but that it was possible, and I think even some upside.
Yeah, from my side. And the one word that I've been working with my team a lot on, and this is, I think, both from a personal and professional wise, is prioritization. During this time, it is so easy to just get bogged down in the things that aren't as important. And I think from a work-wise, from a personal-wise, the last 6-8 months have, for me, been able to help me understand what is most important. And from a professional wise, the fact that all of these groups came together and prioritized this as an initiative, I think that speaks volumes to how important it is to our organizations. And so I think that's the kind of the parting words that I would, my soon-to-be wife, her mother-in-law, or her mother, is a life coach. And her and I were just talking about what are the conversations she's having with her executives, and that prioritization just keeps coming to all parts of our lives. So one, take that for yourself and think about what it really means. But two, see that we are here right now. We've spent our time because this is important to us, and this isn't us just going to another random panel that Brian mentioned with all the travels. This is what we've truly prioritized because we all believe it is that important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
And
Thank you
my
so much,
observation.
Justin.
Oh, sorry. I think there might be a lag. My observation is that this effort, I think, was able to be more global because we weren't traveling, ironically. So
Sumedha,
because we were able to have
Sumedha?
flexible meetings.
Or Ben, any parting thoughts?
Oh no, Sumedha's talking. I think it's just a little bit of a lag on your end, Sandra. Let's Sumedha. I don't want to continue.
I was just saying, I think, because we were able to have flexible work days, we had really global representation. You see that the press release was translated into 4 or 5 languages. The review committee is very global. The people who participated, I think that was kind of an ironic realization for me that despite not traveling and going to other
Ben,
places.
are you speaking? Sorry, did I miss you?
Sandra, I think there's a lag between you and Sumedha, but Sumedha is talking. Sumedha, go for it.
I think we got through the point, but I'll hand it over to Ben.
No worries, guys. And I'll echo your thoughts here. Look, this is really a testament to globalization. I mean, the fact and the democratization of assets that DLT has been able to really drive forward. Again, I'm pushing this from a financial services piece because this is what we focus on at SDX primarily. But the democratization of access, the global access to finance, and traditionally blocked financial products and access to different attributes of wealth. I mean, this is such a great effort that we've been able to see drive through the pandemic with ease almost. I mean, it's really been something that's almost been an accelerator for the digital world immensely, both on the crypto side and on the institutional digital asset side. And what does that say? That says really this is a borderless effort. This is something that goes beyond having to sit in a meeting room and shake somebody's hand to get full business done. This is something that can really transcend the global barriers in that front. That leads me to one of my favorite quotes that's always used by our CEO, Tim Grant, all the time, is that value is unlocked at the intersection of previously walled gardens. And this is the exact effort in which is going to break those walled gardens that traditionally exist in the financial service industry. And with that, it's an immensely valuable proposition to everybody involved.
Well, guys, I have to say our time is up, and it's been incredible to get together with you guys, especially with the launch being today. I'm going to leave you with a couple more pieces of trivia. Did you all know today is World Standards Day? Look it up. It is World Standards Day. We did not plan on that.
I
Just
can imagine the
FYI.
conversation that led to an agreement on that, right? Which day should it be? I don't know, 10/14, 10/15, 10/13,
I'm sure there was an organization set up to figure that out.
right?
Codified in a standard.
If I may ask to have our last few slides put up, I want to thank you all. These are some of our other partners out of especially China and South Korea and India. We had partners, Europe, we had partners from all over, Kazakhstan. Just want to thank our core partners here, as well as if you are all interested in checking out the interactive map, as well as the reports, the next slide will give you a QR code plus the URL. So we thank you for your time, and I want to thank my esteemed partners for spending an evening discussing what we believe obviously is a very crucial project, and it is available to any one of you to check out. So please do, and join us if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.